Teresita and Danilo Valdez returned home from work. It was a quiet, late spring Saturday evening. They were expecting to find their daughter, Jastine, waiting for them. But the house was silent. They tried reaching Jastine, but weren't able to. Jastine's mother checks her phone messages and realizes their last message exchange was at 4:20 p.m. that day, when she asked Jastine to grab some bread before she headed home. At the time, Teresita had no reason to believe that this simple request would be their final exchange. Because what happened momentarily after would haunt not just Teresita and Danilo, but the Irish nation forever.
If anybody can help us to locate her, we would very much appreciate.
Before we go into the details of what happened to Jastine, we first need to understand what happened on the day she disappeared. That day unfolded in Enniskerry in Ireland, a village just 30 minutes south of Dublin. Many describe it as a postcard village, popular amongst tourists and filmmakers. For the Valdez family, it was an ordinary Saturday. Teresita and Danilo went to work as they usually did, leaving their daughter to go about her day. The parents worked at Charlesville House, where the family also lived. Teresita worked as a housekeeper, and Danilo was employed as a groundsman. The Valdez family had moved to Ireland from the Philippines in search of a better life. Jastine, their only child, joined them in 2013 after they gained Irish citizenship. She quickly embraced her new life, dedicating herself to her studies, her work, and her family. Jastine is pursuing a degree in accountancy at IT Tallaght. She worked 2 jobs, a part-time care assistant, as well as a waitress in Bray. Jastine is in a committed relationship with her boyfriend, Joseph Squire. They've been dating for 6 months. People describe Jastine as a happy person, full of energy. She was well known as someone who loved her family and was grateful not just to them, but also to the people of Ireland for the opportunities that they received thanks to their new life in this country. Sadly, this was all about to change on May 19th, 2018. That Saturday, Jastine had an appointment at 2 p.m. with an immigration officer at the Bray Gardai station to renew her residency permit. Throughout the day, she stayed in constant touch with her mother via Facebook chat. The mother and daughter were very close. They exchanged 63 messages on that day alone. And after her appointment, Jastine went for a quick workout at the Ben Dunn's gym at the Cherrywood Business Park. After her workout, she stopped by a store to pick up a loaf of bread, as requested by her mother. Fast forward to 5:40 p.m., and she's seen getting on the 185 bus in Bray. 20 minutes later, she's seen arriving at the beautiful Enniskerry village. From there, she began her 15 to 20 minute walk home alone along the R760 Kilcroney Road, a route that she had taken countless times before. And today, it was a beautiful spring day. The sun was still out at 6 p.m. She had no way of knowing that during the entire route, she was being followed by a dark-colored SUV. And as she walked on the Kilcroney Road towards Charleswood House, this dark-colored SUV pulled over. Witnesses around reported seeing a white male approaching her and abruptly punching her in the face. He then dragged the dazed and dizzy Jastine into his car and sped away. The abduction might have gone unnoticed if it was anywhere else, but being that it was still bright outside, several people saw what happened, and at least 2 witnesses called the Gardai almost immediately. Minutes later, another witness caught a glimpse of a distressed female passenger in an SUV.
I saw a car stopped on the road with no lights and no blinkers. The door of the boot was open. I heard shouting. She was sitting at the edge of the boot, looking out at me. I saw an Asian face with dark hair. The shouting turned to screaming. I heard a deep male voice shouting angrily. I began to feel there was something very wrong.
The woman was frantically banging on the back window, a clear sign that she wasn't in the vehicle of her own volition. The witness pulled over and called emergency services, which is 999, immediately. When the Gardai arrived at the site where Jastine had been abducted, they found her shopping bag containing a loaf of bread and a smashed cell phone. Within 15 minutes of the first call, 3 patrol cars were already dispatched to the area to search for the vehicle. A Gardai helicopter also joined in the search efforts. Another trail of clues arrived at 6:20 p.m. when a motorist reported seeing an Asian woman in the back of an SUV, leaving Bray and heading towards N11. Gareth Thompson, who was driving behind that vehicle, recalled that he noticed a little girl waving. She had both of her hands up. She had a concerned look. She was sitting at an angle and it didn't look comfortable. He informed the Gardai of this an hour later at 7:22 p.m. Now, while the Gardai knew that someone was missing, they had no idea who exactly this person was. It wasn't until 11:40 p.m. when Valdez's parents themselves reported their daughter missing that the police realized that the Asian-looking woman they were looking for is very likely Jastine Valdez. The couple were already worried as they weren't able to get in contact with their daughter, but when they noticed that helicopter circling over Enniskerry, it gave them a bad feeling and pushed them to make a formal missing persons report with the Gardai directly. By 4 a.m. that night, investigators made a breakthrough. By reviewing the CCTV footage around the Dublin bus stop near the abduction site, they identified the suspect vehicle. It was a Nissan Qashqai, and the license plate 171D20419 was registered to a woman named Nicola Hennessey, who lived in Bray. So I've been digging this website, circle.com, which helps me look into background checks for people for my true crime videos, but it can also be useful for you in a number of scenarios. Let's say you met someone new online and you're going on your first date. You might want to look them up just to make sure you're safe. Or you have kids and you're thinking of moving to a new area. Well, then you should definitely check if there's any registered sex offenders who live there and who they are. I'll go through 2 examples to show you how easy this is. So here on the Circle website, you can see a lot of options here on the left. Person lookup, phone number lookup, email lookup, but we're going to go down here to the offenders list. You can search by first name, last name, and city, but I'm just going to search by location. Let's say I want to go to New York. Wow, look at all this. There's a map, can zoom in, and I'm pretty sure if I chose a more specific area, I could do that. I'm going to go down here and select Hector Reynoso, pulled from the US Police database. And you can even see what he's convicted for. And I can download a PDF version of this. Another option is people's criminal records, first name, last name, someone I covered previously. Now this service is only available in the United States. So for my American viewers, head to circle.com or click the link in the description below. The Gardai rushed over to speak to Nicola directly. She had told them that her husband, Mark Hennessey, had taken their car on Saturday and hadn't returned home yet. Nicola did manage to reach Mark by phone at 8 a.m. that morning. When she asked him where he was, he said he had slept in the car by the seafront. When she pushed him further or when he was coming home, he simply replied, "Soon." Mark Hennessey, a man in his 40s, worked as a banksman on construction sites. He and Nicola have 2 daughters of their own, one who was just born the year before. Mark is described as a typical middle-aged, middle-class family man. According to Nicola, on Saturday that morning, Mark left for work at 7:30 a.m. He returned back around 3:15 p.m. Half an hour later, Nicola used the car herself to go to some shops. She returned back home at 5 p.m. At 5:25, Mark left the house, taking the car, saying he was going out for a drink, presumably to the local pub. The Gardai believed it was during this time frame that Mark abducted Jastine and never came back home. The Gardai soon learned that Mark's life was far from the image of the stable, happily married father and family man that he tried to project. In reality, his marriage was on the brink of collapse. He had accumulated significant debt, and he was using social media apps such as Tinder to meet other women and have secret flings. But his downward spiral also involved drugs. He was a frequent cocaine user, and he was doing his best to hide all this from his family and close friends. But still, no one could understand why Mark would simply abduct Jastine. Friends and family did not believe he was a violent person. In fact, they described him as quiet and awkward, but not in a creepy kind of way, an obliging neighbor and a normal dad. So all this really came as a shock when the Gardai pronounced Mark as their prime suspect in the abduction of Jastine Valdez. A breakthrough arrived when a witness, Christina Connolly, was leaving work and she spotted a vehicle that matched a Nissan Qashqai. Acting quickly, she called the Gardai and provided her location. She continued to follow the SUV as it's made its way to a car park at the Cherrywood Industrial Estate. She said, "I decided to follow him. He was looking in his rearview mirror." Realizing the potential danger she was in if she continued to follow the pursuit by herself, she made the decision to stop and notify the Gardai instead. She noticed he was very aware of her following him as he kept glancing through his rearview mirror. Shortly after she made the call, an armed Gardai response unit arrived at the industrial estate. It was now 8 p.m. and the Gardai had located Mark's vehicle. There was someone inside, possibly two, possibly Jastine. The Gardai assumed Mark was in there and he was armed and dangerous, so they approached the vehicle slowly, ordering him to exit, but Mark refused. Mark appears to have a 10 centimeter or 4-inch blade in his hand. It's a Stanley knife. Then, in one swift motion, he slices his left wrist down to his elbow, bleeding profusely. The Gardai increased their pressure, shouting at him, "Armed police, drop the knife!" One of the Gardai sneaks up on the vehicle and attempts to open the door, but it's locked shut. He then starts using force. Perhaps it's at this instance when Mark realized he's done for, because he brings that blade next to his neck and puts his other hand on the steering wheel. It's unclear what happened next, but there's a gunshot with a bright white light illuminating the parking lot. And then Mark is seen slumping over the steering wheel. The Gardai then proceed to reach through and unlock the door before they go in and pull Mark out and put him on the floor. He's then arrested as well as being offered medical aid. Another Gardai carefully peers into the vehicle, especially at the floorboards, as they believed Jastine might be tied up. Unfortunately, there's no luck and Jastine is nowhere to be found. The paramedics on the scene are working hard to keep Mark alive, and at the same time, the detectives are pleading with him to reveal the whereabouts of Jastine. It's unclear whether Mark was unresponsive or simply refused to answer, but he offers nothing. Mark's family were actually nearby, as they had joined in the search efforts the moment they had been alerted to the manhunt. They were searching for both Mark and Jastine, hoping for her safe return and also for Mark's well-being. But then they heard this gunshot ring out in the distance, and they frantically ran over in the direction of the sound. When they arrived, they saw a lot of Gardai nearby, cars, paramedics. They rushed in, feeling the worst, hoping that Mark was okay, but a Gardai had to stop them. And then their worst fear became reality when they learned that Mark had died due to the gunshot they heard earlier. He was pronounced dead at 8:38 p.m. But what about Jastine? There was no signs of her in the car. And now, with Mark Hennessey dead, the Gardai had lost their best chance of finding her. They're racing to find any clues to locate Jastine. What if they were too late? But then, a breakthrough, as one of the Gardai discovered a blood-stained piece of paper in the vehicle. The only legible words were "sorry" and "Puck's Castle." Puck's Castle is a 16th century fortified tower in Rathmichael, South County of Dublin. These days, it's mostly a ruin. The roof is long gone, and all that's left are 4 crumbling stone walls. But this abandonment could also mean it's a near-perfect location to hide somebody. The area around it is a dense woodland, the kind of place that's beautiful in the daylight, but which makes for nightmares at night. The Gardai had no choice. They combed through every inch of the area, desperately hoping to find a clue that might lead them to Jastine. Then, on Monday morning, May 21st, they found their first clue when they located her handbag. But this feeling of hope was short-lived when that same day at 3 p.m., Jastine's body was discovered, hidden in a thick gorse and dense undergrowth. Her body was stiff and cold. She had been dead for quite some time. The Gardai believed that she had been killed within hours of her abduction and left there for several days. It was the worst-case scenario and an absolute nightmare for her parents. During an inquest to determine the exact cause of how Jastine died, Dr. Linda Mulligan, a pathologist who also performed the autopsy on Jastine, soon presented her findings. Dr. Mulligan confirmed the cause of death as asphyxia due to manual strangulation. She determined that Jastine died on Saturday evening, shortly after her abduction. Jastine sustained bruising and abrasions throughout her body, but especially on her thighs and genitals. It couldn't be definitively determined if Jastine had been raped prior to her death, but it's very likely that she was. The toxicology report showed that Jastine also had cocaine in her system, and the Gardai believed that Mark forced her to take cocaine, or some of his own ended up into her system somehow. The coroner, Dr. Myra Cullinane, called Jastine's death thoroughly shocking and said it was inconceivable how her parents could cope with losing their only child in such a cruel and tragic way. Based on their investigation, the Gardai presented a timeline of events that day. Mark Hennessey left his home at 5:25 p.m. and went to the Ramblers Rest Pub in Ballybrack. He walked in but didn't order anything. People were occupied by the FA Cup final on the TV, but eyewitnesses said that Mark seemed agitated. After about 10 minutes in the pub, he got up, said he was bored, and left. Around 5:43 p.m., CCTV cameras caught him walking out and driving off in his car. It's believed he saw Jastine walking alone in Cherrywood after she had finished her gym workout. He continued to follow and stalk her and kept an eye on her as she got on the 185 bus. CCTV from the bus confirmed that his car was following it the entire time. He was sticking to the same route until Jastine got off the bus. An alternative theory suggested that Mark actually knew Jastine beforehand and met her through an online dating app, but there was no evidence of this. The Gardai believed that this wasn't a premeditated act, that this was instead a crime of opportunity, driven by Mark's strong, deviant, and sexual desire. Around 6:50 p.m., another driver reported seeing a black Nissan Qashqai driving erratically on Puck's Castle Lane. This road leads to Puck's Castle. Gardai believed Mark raped Jastine either in the car or at Puck's Castle itself, and then ended her life through choking her to death. After this, he dumped her body where he could hide it in the undergrowth. Once he was done, he left the area and reached out to his drug dealers, trying to score more cocaine. Later that night, around 11 p.m., he returned to the Ramblers Rest Pub. Witnesses stated how he seemed calm and normal, as if nothing wrong had happened at all. He mainly stood in the doorway, chatting with people, but didn't order a drink. After he left, it's unclear exactly what he did. He must have been aware of the manhunt after him. Perhaps he did go to the seafront and sleep in his car, as he told his wife at 8 a.m. that morning. It's also unclear when exactly he wrote that note, but the fact that he wrote a note is indicative that he must have felt some guilt for what he did, because less than 36 hours after leaving the pub, he was confronted by Gardai, and in his failed attempt to end his own life, was ironically shot and killed by one of the officers. The Gardai presented the downward spiral of Mark's life, the crippling debts, the binges on alcohol and drugs, the secrets he was keeping from his family, and the drug-fueled state that he was in that led him to act out in such a horrific way. Jastine was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. Does the drug-fueled state take away some of the responsibility for Mark's actions? And although the crime seems spontaneous, the fact that Mark Hennessey had abducted, raped, and murdered a woman in broad daylight, many suspected he had done this before. Some believed that Mark Hennessey was linked to some other crimes in the area, such as the infamous disappearance in the 1990s or the Irish Triangles, where a series of young women disappeared without a trace over the course of 5 years, but their disappearances occurred without witnesses or significant evidence. The Gardai ran Mark's DNA through the system, but there were no matches to any previous cases. However, that does not necessarily mean that he hasn't done anything like this before. With Mark gone and no one able to question him, he took his secrets to his grave. Jastine's body was repatriated to the Philippines for burial. Some sources say the ordeal had such a profound effect on them that they made the decision to leave the country for good. It was only after her death that her parents found a letter that Jastine had written for them. Jastine stated how thankful she was to her parents for giving her such a beautiful life, for raising her, supporting her, and always being there for her. Jastine, a woman walking home alone in broad daylight with many people around, you would have no reason to believe that she would be in danger, but against all odds and expectations, this is exactly what happened. Life can be extremely fragile and unpredictable. This is Victor, and I want to give a quick shout out to our channel members. Thank you for supporting my work. I truly appreciate it. This is Crimes Anatomy. Please like this video and subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you in the next one. Have a great day, folks.